Chapter 4. Your mummy isn't really your mummy. As is the case for many of us, my life thus far has been an ever-changing mix of joy, happiness, sadness, and occasional despair. Yet, looking back over the decades, one day in the spring of 1983 stands out as one of the worst moments of my entire life. I've never forgotten the cold, sinking feeling in the pit of my 9-year-old tummy as my best friend at school uttered words that broke my heart. Everyone knows except you, of course, your mummy isn't really your mummy. Seeing the words in print cannot convey the sheer cold fear that gripped me as I struggled to absorb and understand the words my friend was speaking. What on earth could she mean? What a silly thing to say. What a stupid lie to tell. Or was it a lie? Of course, I loved my mummy dearly, as is the case for all young children. She was the heart of my schoolgirl world. How was it possible that the certainty of such a relationship could now be threatened? I was fighting back the tears as I ran home in a daze to what I believed was the emotional safety of my parents' home. Bursting in through our never-locked back door, I found my mummy in our tiny kitchen, fresh from work at another local school, and still dressed in her dinner lady uniform of gray skirt, pure white blouse, and blue tabardé. Necessity to protect herself from the soup splashes and chaos of serving lunches to scores of secondary school children. Although my friend had upset me, I was sure that Mummy would soon take the scary feeling of uncertainty away. Wouldn't she? How wrong can one be? I had been a blissfully happy little girl until that afternoon when my loving childhood world fell apart. It was the day I found out that all the adults I knew, and all the grown-ups I loved and I trusted, had been lying to me. Throughout my young life, it had started like any other, with my normal lessons at school, and with me trying my hardest to please my teachers. One teacher always joked that if she set me one page of writing to do, she would always get back 5. I remember people telling me I was a bright little thing, and so lessons were easy and fun. It was an ethnically diverse school, set between two huge West London council house estates, and I was always the tallest and skinniest girl in my class. I usually came near the top of the form in any tests, which was enough to make me a favorite target for the school bully, little boy no older than me, who would call me names and who sometimes waited after school to tease me, push me across the path, and try to make me cry. It was simply schoolyard stuff and never a serious problem, but the man I knew as my dad was angry when he found me sniffling into my hanky one day after my classmate bully had teased me outside the school gates. Strong, weary, handsome, always loving, and totally dependable, my grandfather, who I had grown up knowing as my dad, was one of the two rocks on which my young life was built. He had a great sense of humor, and was always laughing and joking. His naturally wavy hair smelt of bricoream and was a source of considerable pride. You know, all you girls want hair like mine, he would tell me, an unlikely supposition given that my own hair was so long could sit on it. After years of service in the Royal Navy, grandfather had been made redundant and was at home a great deal as he struggled to find another job. Although I did not understand his unemployment at the time, his house husband role meant that he and I grew even closer. I felt I was lucky to have a daddy always at home while other friends had to wait until almost bedtime before their fathers came home to play. For my grandfather, the bullying incident was easy to deal with. You just have to stand up for yourself, darling. Push the boy back. You're bigger than him anyway. Punch him if you have to. I'll teach you how you can fight. To my mum's, or rather grandmother's, horror, she walked into the house after work to a scene in which Granddad was fighting with me in the living room, teaching me a flat-handed chop to the side of the neck that he guaranteed would win any fight. Don't teach her things like that, she pleaded. She'll go and kill the boy, instead of stopping him bullying. In the event the lesson worked a treat. The very next day I turned the tables on my previously feared tormentor. Although never utilizing the muck-hyped Navy deathblow, I did walk up to the boy after school, full of the confidence my grandfather had given me. I pushed him as hard as I could. He fell on his back, picked himself up, and ran away crying. Looking back, now, I feel just a little ashamed of the way that my newfound power over him developed from that point. I was now the one who waited for him after school and teased and tormented him to the point of tears. On one memorable afternoon, made him kneel down on the path and kiss my school shoes, the first of the innumerable times that men have since literally worshipped at my feet. Being bullied was to play no part, however, in the awful day when I first learned about what I have always thought of as the big lie. After school, that afternoon I had walked home, as I often did, with my best friend Susie. She was a plump, friendly, but always naughty little girl of my own age, who lived near our small, semi-detached house on a London suburban council estate. I think at the time she qualified as my best friend. It was cold, cloudy April weather, and as usual, my house was chilly and damp. One of my abiding memories as a child is of always being cold in that house. It was an old council property, the type now euphemistically termed social housing. It was a form of social housing in my day, too. So cold in winter that huddling together for warmth in a highly social way was the only means of keeping warm. The house is now long gone, and good riddance too, with its lack of any cavity walls, no insulation, no double glazing, and no trace of anything that could remotely be described as central heating. I remember visiting friends in the winter and desperately trying to eke out my stay for as long as possible in order to avoid returning to my own freezing bedroom. There were times when the house seemed colder inside than out, and I hesitated to get into bed because of the chilled, clammy feeling of the sheets. I have long suffered from, thankfully mild, asthma, probably not unrelated to the fact that mold grew unchecked on the damp bathroom walls of my home. My friends now are well aware of my constant need to be warm. That lust for heat comes from growing up in a room where, rather than wipe condensation from the windows, one sometimes had to scrape ice from the inside of the glass before being able to see what the weather might be doing outside. Because her house was always warmer, Susie and I settled down in her small bedroom to play whatever our games were on any particular day. We two seemed always to be talking silly conversations about childhood things and make-believe games of being grown up and what we might do, who we might marry, and where we might live. But this afternoon was different. Susie had a secret to share. The night before, Susie's mummy had been chatting to an elderly neighbor who lived in our street. I still remember the woman well. She was the local busybody, shrew-faced, always a bit miserable, and with rarely a kind word to say about anything to anyone. Susie had overheard their entire conversation and was desperate to tell me her news. "Your mummy's not really your mummy," she said. "And your daddy isn't really your daddy. Your real daddy lives over the road with your real nan and granddad. And your big sister isn't really your sister, and it's all what my mummy calls a God almighty mess. And you are a bastard little girl." Susie was just excited by her news, blurting out her new secret with words that were never meant to be as harsh and unkind as they sound on this page. And neither she nor I had any real understanding of what a bastard was, but we knew it was a naughty, nasty name that grown-ups called each other. As each new revelation tumbled from her lips, I found myself struggling to understand, overwhelmed with a growing sense of horror and disbelief, and fighting a losing battle as I tried hard not to cry. Finally, with tears now streaming down my face, I ran, as fast could be, down Susie's stairs and straight out of her front door. Hurrying across the road and into my own house, I rushed past the two people I had always known as mother and father in the kitchen and took the stairs to time. As I threw myself, sobbing, face down on the bed in the sanctuary of my own little box-room bedroom. My horrified mom was hot on my heels. "Miranda, darling, what on earth is wrong? Why are you crying? Are you hurt? What's the matter?" Single quotes. It took many minutes of her cuddling, holding and reassuring me for me to find the strength to stop crying and give her some sort of answer. I knew that my mummy would make it all better. Susie must have been making up stories, must have been repeating nasty lies about me. She must have been mistaken. But when I told my mom what my little friend had said, there was a horrified and horrifying silence. I thought you knew, darling. We did tell you before, when you were little. Don't you remember? Looking back now, more than 30 years later, into the depths of my memory, I still am not sure if I do remember any of their babyhood explanations or not. Apparently, I had been told as an infant, perhaps just 2 years old, that my real mother was leaving home and that I was to be looked after by my maternal grandparents. I was told that I had been adopted by my nan and granddad and that they would care for me now that my real mummy had moved away. My family then assumed that with duty done, there was no point in repeating the explanation when I grew a little older. Least said, soonest mended, seems to have been their watchword without ever considering that such traumatic news would have been blanked out of my little girl mind, as though no words had ever been spoken in the first place. It may be that I had retained some subconscious worry that all in my family life was not quite what it seemed. I remember being puzzled that other children knew more about the time and the exact circumstances of their own birth. That uncertainty was perhaps the reason why I would occasionally ask my mom gentle questions about it. Oh, how much did I weigh when I was born, Mum? Well, I just don't remember exactly now, Miranda. That's a silly question. I'm not sure. It was a long time ago because you're a grown girl now. How odd it was that my mum couldn't remember my birth weight, I used to think. Naturally, I can recognize now that whatever she did or did not remember, such issues were always brushed aside and my attention quickly deflected onto other things. Then again, perhaps I never had the courage to ask the direct questions that might have proved both more illuminating and more painful. Susie's mum tells her all about when she was born. If you had me then, why don't you remember? Might it have been that even at that young age I was colluding in my own childish way with my family's conspiracy of silence? Might I have been unwittingly conspiring to keep myself in the dark? Whatever the truth of my own complicity, the fact is that from the moment I was originally told the story of my adoption, the scandal was never spoken of again. And even if I had once heard what the adults thought they were telling me, the memory had been utterly lost in those seemingly endless years of early childhood till the day when Susie revealed her big secret. It was thus a devastating moment when I realized that her fantastical story was true. My mummy was not denying it, and so many things were falling into place. An instant explanation as to why my mother and father were older than all my friends' parents. Why Dad had so much gray in his handsome, dark hair. Why Mum dyed her hair blonde to cover up her roots. I remember, vividly, lying face down on my bed and crying till I thought my heart would burst because I realized that I was the only one who did not know the truth. Yet, how could Mummy and Daddy not be Mummy and Daddy any longer? Why had everyone lied to me? Why did everyone else know all about me when I did not even know myself? Even my best friend, her whole family, and as it later transpired, most of the people in my road knew intimate secrets of which I had no knowledge. I was far from being old enough to vocalize such thoughts at the time, but I did feel an overwhelming sense of betrayal and deceit. Many years later, my grandmother, whom I still called my mum till the very day she died, told me how terrifying that afternoon had been for her and my grandfather. I suppose you might want to go and live with Eileen, my birth mother, now? She had said. No, of course not, I had tearfully replied. Why would I ever want to do that? But later, as I lay sobbing on my bed, they were crying in each other's arms in their own bedroom next door. Having failed to find any way of comforting their precious little daughter, they shared a fear that must be common to many adoptive parents. Now knew who my real mother was, and now knew that she still lived less than an hour's drive from my house, with a new young family. Might I demand that we all be reunited? After years of caring and raising me as their own, this loving couple were scared that the girl they thought of only as their own little daughter might suddenly vanish from their lives. It was to be a long time before they lost that particular fear. Finding out such a momentous truth as I had that day, at an age when one can start to understand the ramifications, is an astonishing experience. Every family relationship you think you have straight in your head is thrown out of the window. My mummy was suddenly my grandma, and my daddy was my granddad. My sister was my mother, her husband was my stepfather, my cousins were my brother and sister, my other big sister was suddenly my aunt, with her children promoting themselves instantly from nephew and niece to yet more cousins. I instantly had a new little brother and a new little sister. And where was my real daddy in all this? And my real nan and grandpa on the other side of my family? Amidst such confusion, is perhaps not surprising that in my Suntokomi teenage years, my sweet little Miranda wagon would soon be running off of the rails. Chapter 5, Left Behind. I still thought of my grandparents as my mum and dad, as indeed they legally were, because they adopted me at the age of 2 or 3 shortly before Eileen, Earth Mother, left home. I loved my nan and granddad dearly and would never suggest for a moment that they failed to give me the most loving childhood they could. Equally truthfully, however, I can't pretend that I had same upbringing as my siblings and most of my peers at school. When one's parents are in reality one's grandparents, there are significant yet subtle differences that conspire towards presenting a unique experience of childhood. A combination of their greater age, their old-fashioned attitudes, and their relative poverty left me feeling that for me, life was different from that of others my age. It wasn't that I was jealous or envious of other children, just that I was always aware of the differences. In retrospect, I can also see that my grandparents' own knowledge of the truth of our relationship might sometimes have influenced their attitude to me. I have never doubted their total love and devotion, but having suddenly to raise a young child must at times have brought them heartache as well as love. They never showed any resentment towards my unexpected invasion of their late middle age, but surely there must have been occasions when it must have felt, albeit for fleeting moments, I was a fledgling cuckoo in their nest. I have no more than the vaguest of memories of the day that my big sister left home and left me in the care of the couple who were to become the only mum and dad I've ever known. My deeper understanding of what happened has come over the years from various members of the family. I've been told that during the first couple of years of my life, my birth mother, the woman I've always known by her first name, Eileen, did look after and care for me at my grandparents' house. Apparently, at that age, I knew her as my mummy, a crucial fact, of course, that was rapidly forgotten as I grew from an infant into a child. These days, when speaking of my birth mother, I invariably refer to her simply as my birth mother, rather than Mum or Eileen. I later learned from my birth mother that she was just 15 when she fell pregnant, although she didn't recognize her condition until several months later, after her 16th birthday. Even when she was 5 months pregnant, she apparently sported a 22-inch waist, and it was only after that, as her tummy grew, that her pregnancy was revealed. It was far too late by then for abortion to be an option. Eileen has told me that I was probably conceived the very first time she made love with her then boyfriend, a local lad who was her first serious boyfriend and her first love. Although they had been seeing each other for a while, her parents had never been keen on the relationship because they thought he was both undesirable and unreliable. He treated her well when they were together, but would often disappear from her life with little explanation, returning to pick up the friendship again when it suited him. After I was born, she did have contact with him, but he would still leave for weeks at a time. Finally, her parents had discouraged him from having anything to do with the baby and encouraged Eileen to stop seeing him because he was so unreliable, and they insisted that she needed more stability in her life. For the first couple of years of my life, Eileen lived in the bedroom next door to my tiny nursery room in her parents' West London home. She looked after me with the help of her own mother, and our mother-child relationship was little different from that of any other. In the depths of my memory, I have the tiniest snippets, like snapshot photographs in my head, of her being there, her smile perhaps, and little moments like walking into her room and watching her doing her hair. But because her parents were eager to share babysitting duties, my birth mother could live a relatively normal teenage social life. In time, she met and fell in love with another boy. Eventually, that boy asked her to leave home and marry him. The big unanswered question was, what to do about me? My natural mother's answer was, to leave me behind. When I've thought about it through the years, I've tried to hide away the trauma of that decision. It's been hard sometimes to know that my birth mother was able to abandon her firstborn child. How could she not have taken me with her to live with her new husband? Why did she not send for me a few years later when she had another couple of children, my half-brother and sister, and when I might still have made the transition back to be part of her family? The truth is that, despite the effect it had on my life, it is hard now for me to criticize decisions made so long ago and in such pressurized circumstances. Eileen has told me many times that she regrets her decision to leave me behind. But she was only a teenager and had a forceful mother and father telling her what was for the best. How could she have done differently? My nan and granddad were enjoying their new role as surrogate parents. I was settled and apparently happy in their home, and they could offer a loving and stable upbringing for their beloved granddaughter. My birth mother may well have been weak, but I do believe she thought she was acting for the best. I have long accepted that everybody at the time did what they thought was right and were acting with the best of intentions. And yet lingering doubts do remain. When Eileen tells me now that she wishes I had lived with her, it is hard not to think, well, why didn't you say so at the time? Why didn't you fight for me? When you had a new family, why didn't you take me in then? There is a family story of the day that Eileen left me with her parents. Apparently she swore that if I cried when she left, she would be unable to walk out of the door and would have to take me with her. That upset was sidestepped by my grandmother, who took me off into the back garden so that I would not have to see my mum walk out of the door, and she would not see any tears. Even before she left, my birth mother had signed adoption papers to make the arrangement legal. I've never seen a copy of my original birth certificate, which my grandmother apparently destroyed. Many years later, when I wanted a passport, I applied for a birth certificate copy. It is a surprisingly short and little detailed document, failing to record my mother or father's names and merely stating the date of my birth and that I am, thankfully, a female single quotes ... a T. Sometime soon after Eileen had left, I simply forgot who she was. It's hard to understand how any child can forget their own mum, you might think, but I of course did have a mum and a dad, in the shape of my grandparents. They became my whole childish world and my reality. So much so that when Eileen got married shortly afterwards, I was recruited as a bridesmaid. Far from recalling that event as my mother's marriage, I can remember only that I was as pretty as a picture in a new pink dress. The significance of the actual event had, by then, totally passed me by. That was all long before I rediscovered the truth about why my mum and dad were so much older than me. One girl at my school did have an astonishingly young mother. She seemed like a baby compared with my own mum. So young, highly attractive, lively, and full of energy. I remember her as going out to parties all the time, being very trendy and hip, a huge contrast with my own mother's life. As far as I could see, only one other person in my class had parents anywhere near as old as my mum and dad. Amanda had two far older siblings, and she confided in me she'd been told she was a late addition to the family by mistake. I believe that I must have been a similar late addition by mistake, despite ever really understanding what that meant. What I did know was that other children, who will seize on any slight differences to tease and annoy, were only too happy to take the mickey out of me for having an old mom. I was glad that Amanda was around to share that particular burden. The other reason for valuing Amanda's friendship was that I was painfully shy at that age and didn't always mix comfortably with other kids. It was not that I was unpopular, just that I rarely joined in with the crowd or sought to be a leading light in the group. I would talk to the others, but if they were doing their group thing, what you might call girly games, then I did not want to know. If a sports game was in the offing, however, then I was always the first to be picked. I was ridiculously flexible, so was very good at gymnastics, and my height gave me an unbeatable advantage for netball. In our mixed school, the boys were always playing football and asking me to join in their games. The speed at which I could run and the length I could jump kept me at the forefront of all the athletics as well. Without a family car and with aging parents, I rarely went on the sort of school holiday outings that many of my friends seemed to enjoy. Instead, you would find me most likely in our little back garden, messing around with the netball or trying to do some gymnastics, seeing for how long I could sustain a handstand or attempting the splits. Exercises and backflips on the lawn would keep me amused for hours on end. I loved all sports and might in different circumstances have considered a sporting career. I still train several times a week with the help of a skilled personal trainer and have always tried to keep myself as fit as possible. But any possibility of becoming a professional sportswoman foundered at school on the rocks of my parents' financial problems. Watching sport on television, noticed that some people actually seemed to make their living from this one activity I loved, the one activity at which I truly excelled. Seeing gymnastics in particular, I would ask my grandmother, "How do these girls end up in competitions and stuff?" And she would reply, "Oh, they've got personal trainers and do nothing but practice all day." Wow, can I get a trainer and do that? Oh, don't be silly, Miranda. We haven't got the money for anything like that. I had endless enthusiasm to do a variety of things with my life, but my grandmother had neither the money nor the know-how to encourage or pick up on my interests. None of the above means that my grandparents did not love me to pieces, and I enjoyed a surfeit of emotional warmth and affection from them. Some of that may have come my way because my Nan had herself been raised in an orphanage with no mother love whatsoever after her own mother died, and her father had remarried. She always told me that being in the orphanage was better than the abusive life she had led at home with her father and the original evil stepmother. My granddad had been in the Navy and had then worked at the local Hoover factory before being made redundant when I was very young. He was never able to work again because he suffered from chronic pulmonary obstructive disorder (COPD), which meant that his ability to breathe worsened progressively year after year. At heart, he was a fun-loving person, but as time passed, he was completely struck down by the limitations of his illness. His lung capacity was terrible, really bad, so that even walking up a flight of stairs would cause him to puff and pant. In his later years, all his efforts were expended in just trying to breathe, which cost him his sparkle and brought on depression. "What bloody use am I to anyone? I can't do anything," he would sometimes say. "My bloody legs are no use to me at all. I can't go anywhere." I was asthmatic from an early age, but never suffered remotely as much as my grandfather did. Whereas I might trigger an asthma attack by sudden exertions such as running for a bus, his breathing troubles were continuous and would leave him struggling for air in the day and coughing through the nights. His one regular pleasure was a trip to his local pub where he would play dominoes and down a pint or two prior to coming home and falling asleep on the sofa. He used that pub for nearly 50 years and yet never had any sort of drink problem. He just enjoyed the company and the routine of that part of his life. Even so, some of my funniest childhood memories are of teasing him when he was a little too much the worse for wear before those afternoon naps. I would put all his hair in elastic hairbands as he slept and try to draw on him before my Nan realized what I was doing. She took my joking in her normal good-natured way until the day I drew a picture of Granddad and wrote a note across it, "Too drunk to remember. That's not funny, Miranda. it's just rude," scolded my nan. I still have the picture complete with the replacement caption words with which I calmed her anger. "God Save the Queen" was my slightly surreal attempt to get back into her good books. My grandfather loved children, and when family came to stay, he would welcome my cousins with open arms. He called us all bairns, a hangover from his upbringing in the north of England. Much of the advice my granddad gave me throughout my childhood did stick and has been of use to me in my business life, even though I cannot always follow his golden rules on never getting into debt, never borrow money, Miranda, never lend money, do not get seduced into asking for credit, don't spend what you do not have. It was a reflection of the fact that he was probably the most honest man I have ever known. In his younger days he passed examinations to be a police officer, but the starting pay was then so low that, with a young family to look after, he could not afford to take the job. His grasp of mathematics was excellent, and family legend has it that he was offered a grammar school place as a child, but his parents had to turn it down because they couldn't afford the school uniform. Much though I loved him, I cannot deny that among all of his good traits of forbearance and honesty, he did have a couple of faults. He could not let any argument end other than on his terms. When we argued, as we did more frequently over the years, he would listen until I had finished every possible argument, and then jump in one last time with a little jibe in order that he could be sure he had the last word. He was also an obsessive hoarder, possibly from being short of material of all kinds in the post-war period. My favorite item among the treasure trove of junk which sat untouched for years in his garden shed was a wooden dining room chair with only 3 legs. "Why on earth are you keeping that chair?" my nan would demand. "There's nothing wrong with it," he would retort. "All you need do is stick a piece of wood on to replace that leg, and it'll be as good as new." But you're never going to do that, are you? Maybe not, but I just might. He and my grandmother thought the world of each other, and there was a joy about growing up in a household where so much love was in the air. They were never openly affectionate towards each other. The idea of kissing in public would have shocked them to the core, but after a drink or two he would sneak a sly cuddle, only to be told, "Johnny, stop it right now. The children are watching." Children were very important to my grandmother. In addition to loving me, she would care for other children. After school, earning a tiny extra bit of money to supplement the pittance she earned working part-time as a school dinner lady. That income was the only money coming into the house, although I presume that there was some kind of sickness benefit payment for my grandfather, and that their real daughter, my birth mother Eileen, and her husband helped out financially on a regular basis. Beyond money, there was one legacy which my grandfather passed to me while I was still in junior school, and which has had a value greater than anything else in my later life. He taught me to stand up for myself, to be independent and strong, and not let anybody push me around. Those were valuable assets, I'm sure you'll agree, for anyone planning to become a dominatrix. Chapter 6, Sexual Awakening. It was the chilly touch of colder air on the skin of my bare legs that aroused me from the depths of my early hours of the morning sleep. Then just 11 years old, I could sleep for England, and so I was still barely conscious as I felt the weight of the bed covers slowly lift from my thighs. I was certain at first I was dreaming, albeit a somewhat sexual dream for such a little girl. Perhaps the then love of my life, Tom Cruise, had decided to pop into the bedroom and make all my prepubescent dreams come true. The Hollywood actor was much on my mind at that age. I was enjoying a sleepover at a school friend's house, and we had been giggling all evening about how much we would all love to kiss him. As I came fully awake, however, I realized that someone most certainly not the infinitely desirable Mr. Cruise was gradually drawing the sheets off my half-naked body. I shot bolt upright in bed, barely stifled a scream, and came face to face in the dark of the bedroom with my friend's father, crouching at the end of the bed and peering intently down at the schoolgirl white pants which were pretty much all that now covered my body. Chaos was about to ensue. The year was 1985, and the evening had started as one of the most giggly, fun times I had enjoyed for a while. In the long summer holidays, I had agreed to go and stay at a friend's house for a sleepover party with 2 other girls. None of us were yet at an age to be sexually active, but all of us were besotted with celebrity idols in a way that only young girls can truly understand. My passion then as now, if truth be told, was for the actor Tom Cruise, who had just shot to sexy stardom in the film Risky Business, and whose forthcoming role as a raunchy sex god in the movie Top Gun was already being trailed in teen magazines and television shows. I loved Tom with a passion and had spent a good part of the evening proving my devotion by engaging in a kissing contest, competing against the smooching abilities of my equally besotted friend. The game was simple. We each had a photograph of Tom Cruise, and the winner would be the one who could kiss his image for the longest time. It truly was no contest, and I think I can still claim that 21 minutes is the world record for Cruise kissing, if such an achievement ever enters the record books. The competition in my friend's bedroom was followed by all of us sharing a whispered, graphic account of what we thought we might do to attract Tom's interest were he to stroll in through the bedroom door. None of us knew much about sex, but could all imagine a few of the sexy delights we might offer him. With the experience I've since gained in the adult industry, I'd offer him an even better time now, should he ever wish to take up the offer. With Tom's lip-dampened photographs safely put away for the night, all 3 of us had settled down to sleep on a couple of mattresses spread out across the bedroom floor. The house was already quiet. My friend's mother had gone to bed, and her father was in the habit of staying up alone until the early hours downstairs. I snuggled down under the sheets in the middle of the group, and with our bedtime much later than usual, we must all have fallen quickly off to sleep. I don't really have any idea of what time I woke up, but I was conscious of this sudden, freezing cold sensation on my legs. It was utterly ice cold. I woke up with a thudding heart, which is a bizarre experience to have, and was aware of someone else in the room. I was wearing just a short nightshirt and knickers and kneeling at the end of the bed, lifting up the hem of my nightie and staring intently at my pants, was my friend's dad, Ian. Even more disturbingly, he was wearing nothing except his underpants. He looked more terrified than me when I spun around and saw him. He was mouthing the words, "Sorry, sorry, really sorry," as he jumped up and sped out through the bedroom door and off down the stairs. By then I was screaming. It was such a shock, and it took me a moment to realize that he must have been looking under the covers for a while before he disturbed me by actually touching my clothes. With my friends now awake and asking what had happened, my would-be voyeur's wife came sleepily into the room. "He was going to touch me. He was going to do something to me," gasped. "What on earth do you mean? Touch you? Who was touching you?" "Ian. He was lifting the quilt up and looking at me. He was looking at my pants. He was going to do something." The words tumbled out in a jumble because I was truly upset and frightened. It was the first time that I had ever thought that somebody was going to touch me like that. It dawned on me that I could have been raped, and I was shaking with fear. My friend's mum looked shocked and called downstairs to her husband, Ian, come upstairs, would you?" He wandered into the room as cool as a cucumber, and by now fully dressed. What's going on? What's the matter?" he asked, his face all puzzled innocence. He listened and did a good job of appearing to be horrified, as his wife explained that I was making accusations that he had been in the bedroom. "But I've just been downstairs watching the telly," he protested. "What's she on about?" And then he turned directly to me, still cowering under the bedclothes. "What are you talking about? I haven't been near you." Faced with a blatant lie, I pleaded to be believed, but he was here, honest. "He was just wearing his pants." "What color pants did he have on?" asked his wife. "Black." "He was wearing black pants and nothing else at all." "Well, that's odd because he doesn't have any black pants anyway." "You must have been dreaming. You've let your imagination run away with you. It's naughty to say such things. Now, let's say no more about it and get you all back to sleep. I was pretty sure that his wife believed me about what had happened but had decided to protect her own family. Whatever the truth of the matter, then the guy's daughter also joined in the attack. It's all that Tom Cruise stuff, isn't it? She declared. We've been talking about kissing him and then you must have dreamed it and blamed my dad. No, I'm telling you, he was in the room and looking at me. Well, my dad wouldn't do that, and we were here on either side of you, and I didn't feel anything, and that was that. I was left, basically, accused of being a liar, and nothing more was mentioned about the incident. I knew I hadn't imagined what had happened, but in the face of such united family resistance, I had no way of proving it. My last thought as I finally drifted back to sleep was that it had been dark in the room, and perhaps those pants had been blue, not black. That was the end of my summer trips to stay with my friend. Although I had spent lots of time there in the past, I never stayed in that house again. Nobody said a word about the covers that had moved in the nighttime. The incident was never mentioned in any way, but I was never invited again. I wanted to tell my grandmother about it, but I thought, his wife doesn't believe me. His daughters don't believe me. Why should anyone else believe me? Not long afterwards, however, the next time I saw my biological mother, I told her the story of what had happened and why I was no longer staying with my friend. I was still angry and upset that nobody had done anything about it. I believe you, Moran, my mother said, but don't tell your grandmother. She won't understand how anyone could do that, and it will upset her dreadfully. My mother said that my story had not come as a surprise. I know the family and I know him. He's a creep, and he's tried it on with women before. I know one woman who was pinned up against the wall in their kitchen and had to fight him off. It was yet a further shock to me that she could have been so naive. I was shocked that my mother had never warned me of the dangers I could face, even though she knew some of that family's history and that I had stayed there often in the past. Looking back now at what happened, I think my fears of rape and sexual assault were probably an overreaction.